Okay, so welcome back. Today we're going through. Oh, today we are going through February-March 2022 question paper 12. Okay, so we'll start from the bottom. Okay, which government monetary policies would be the most effective in a global recession? Okay, so the first thing is, in a global recession, what happens? In a global recession, that's where our real GDP is falling for 6 months or more consecutively. Okay, so how do we fix that? We have to find a way of increasing AD, moving AD to the right to try and stimulate an increase in real GDP. And therefore the monetary policies that we're going to use will be expansionary monetary policies, which will be either a depreciation of the exchange rate, it will be a reduction in the rate of interest, it will be a reduction in credit regulations, or it will be an increase in the money supply. Okay, so let's take a look at the options that we have available. Okay, first of all, raising the rate of interest, we know that that's wrong because that would be designed as the opposite of expansionary. It would be a contractionary monetary policy, which would be designed to move AD to the left. The same with restricting the money supply. It's the opposite of the expansionary policies we have given here. Allowing the rate of interest to fluctuate and increasing business taxation. So the first thing here, fluctuation in interest rates aren't going to help us come out of a recession if the interest rate is continuously going up or down. And the same with increasing business taxation. That's actually a fiscal policy. It's not a monetary policy, so that can't be part of our answer here. Increasing the budget surplus and raising tariffs on imports. Again, the raising of tariffs on imports is a protectionism policy. It is not a monetary policy, so we know it can't be that. But if we keep the rate of interest low, matches up with what we've down here, and if we increase the money supply, that also matches up. So C is our correct answer. Okay, very good. So an increase in which variable is a contractionary monetary policy? So all we have to do is come down here and see it's going to be the opposite of this. So it'll be an appreciation. It'll be the interest rate going up, credit regulations going up, and the money supply going down. Okay, so therefore increasing money supply would be expansionary monetary policy. We've just described that below. The changes that happen with the budget surplus or the budget deficit, they're generally influenced by fiscal policies because they're relating to taxes, which is relating to our government revenue / our government expenditure. Okay, so fiscal policy will have a direct impact on the budget deficit or budget surplus depending on which policy we're using, but raising the interest rate is the contractionary monetary policy. Okay, 28. Now this is actually no longer part of the syllabus, but we'll just explain it anyway. So reducing the exchange rate helps to decrease a country's balance of payment deficit because it makes imports more expensive and it makes exports cheaper. What does this statement describe? So the first thing is, it can't be a deflationary policy because it is designed to move AD to the right. Okay, now it's also not going to be a policy of direct controls. That's no longer part of the syllabus, so we can discount that. And either is expenditure reducing or expenditure switching, but we'll just explain them anyway. So basically, when we use monetary policy, we can describe them as being either expenditure reducing or expenditure switching. So expenditure reducing, just to explain that, that is basically where we are trying to reduce the demand in the economy. Okay, and to reduce the demand in the economy, spending on imports will fall. Okay, whereas an expenditure switching policy is kind of, the hint is given to you by the name. So instead of reducing the demand in the economy, what we're going to do is, with expenditure switching, we're aiming, or the purpose of it, is to switch consumer spending towards domestic goods away from imports. Okay, now which one of these policies matches up more, do you think? The depreciation of the exchange rate is going to be an expenditure switching policy. So that's because if we look here, it doesn't reduce the demand in the economy, because when our exports go up and our imports go down, that affects the component of aggregate demand that we refer to as X minus M, which is our net exports, and that is going to actually increase the aggregate demand in the economy. Okay, so it's not going to reduce the demand, it's basically just switching the demand away from the imports and towards domestic goods, or exports in this case. Okay. 27. Now these questions are always very difficult, the comparative advantage questions, and they provide a really good barometer for students of where you're at. So if you've got no problem with answering these questions, you can pretty well assume that you're on a very good path to getting a good score in these multiple choice tests. If you're struggling with them, you could still be doing quite well. They're generally the hardest style of question that comes up, at least in my opinion anyway, because they do tend to change these questions around a lot. So we've got two countries, X and Y, who are producing food and drink. The table shows how many hours it takes them to produce 1 unit of each. Okay, what will be the result if country Y doubles its productivity in the output of drink and both countries only produce 1 good according to comparative advantage? Okay, so because we're given the hours that it takes them here, that's what we need to find out is, so it's taking 10 hours to make 1 item of food, and it's taking 2 hours to make an item of drink. So the first thing we need to do is we need to find out their production level per hour. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take country X, and we're basically just going to calculate this very simply, right? So for country X, for food, because it takes them 10 hours to make 1 unit of food, that means that per hour they are making 0.1 units. I'll just put pH to signify that it's per hour. And for drink, country X will be making 0.5 units of drink per hour. Okay, so for country Y, we just need to calculate the same thing, because we need to have a base from which we can calculate the comparative advantage of. So for country Y, for food, it takes them 20 hours to make a unit of food, so that means that it takes them, or they're producing per hour, 0.05 units of food. And for drink, it takes them 12 hours to make a unit of drink, so at a rough estimate, 0.08 units that they can produce per hour. Technically it would be 0.085. Okay, so once we do that, we need to calculate the comparative advantage for the two of them, right? So if we take country X again over here, put it in a different color. Okay, so for country X, the opportunity cost of making 1 drink is going to be 0.1 divided by 0.5, which means that they have to give up, in order to make one drink, 0.2 units of food. Okay, and for country Y, we just do the same thing. So in order to make one drink for country Y, we're doing the same thing. We're dividing 0.05 into 0.08, and we're going to find that we are losing 0.31 units of food every time we're making a unit of drink. Okay, so what can we summarize from this? We can summarize that country X has the comparative advantage in making drinks. Okay, why? Because they're losing, or they're foregoing, less units of food when they're doing so. Okay, so if we calculate their opportunity costs in terms of food, we'll find out which one of them has the comparative advantage in this case. So in order to make 1 unit of food, we can see that if we multiply, do you want to do it very simply, it takes us 10 hours to make a unit of food, and it takes us 2 hours to make a unit of drink, or we're making 0.1 units per hour and 0.5 drinks per hour. So after 10 hours we'll make 1 unit here, but after 10 hours of making drinks we would have to forego 5 drinks for country X. Whereas for country Y, if we are to make 1 unit of food, we would have to forego 3.2 drinks. Okay, now why is that? So you might say, why is it not 1.6? Because what we're told is that they double their productivity. So this figure that's down here as 0.08 is going to be doubled, and it's going to change to 0.16 units per hour of drink that country Y can make, because it tells us that in the question here. The result that country Y doubles their productivity in the output of drink. Okay, so the initial calculation of how many units they can make per hour has to be doubled as their productivity doubles. Okay, so therefore we can see that country Y has the comparative advantage in making food. So what's our correct answer going to be? Very simple. We can see that X will continue to produce drink because we've calculated they have the lower opportunity cost for that. Y will produce drink instead of food. That's not true. Y is going to produce food. And when it comes to the world drink production, or whether the production will increase or fall, we can't calculate that, right? Because we don't know how many units they can make. So we don't know how many hours are being input into the economy in order to make these food and these drinks. All we know is how many hours it takes for them to make them, right? But we haven't got any indication of output levels, so we can't actually make a determination about whether the output will go up or whether the output will go down. Okay, difficult question. Like I said, the comparative advantage questions generally are. Thankfully, they get much easier from here. So, what is not a form of protectionism? So, an embargo, that is a form of protectionism. Remember that an embargo is where we have like a trade ban between countries, okay? So a trade ban, an example of an embargo would be between North Korea and the USA, where the USA will, because of the policies or the politics in North Korea, they'll basically refuse to trade with them. An increase in sales tax is not a form of protectionism. Remember, protectionism is designed basically to either look after the domestic economy or to find a way of increasing our exports. So subsidies on goods for exports, that is a form of protectionism because it's protecting our domestic producers, right? It's trying to make our exports more competitive internationally. And the same thing with voluntary export restraints. They are a form of protectionism as well. So again, that would be if we're looking to focus or switch our production or increase our demand in the domestic market instead of the exports. Okay, but the increase in sales tax is going to be a tax that's imposed on a good or a service. It is not a form of protectionism because it is not trying to protect the domestic industries. Okay, it's actually being harmful to them. So if you want to look over the protectionism, all the different tools of protectionisms are given in the revision notes on the slides. Question 25. The price of a country's exports rise by 5% while the price of its imports fall by 5%. What will definitely improve in the country as a result of these changes? Okay, very simple. That will be the terms of trade, because we know that the terms of trade will increase when the price of exports become more expensive relative to the prices of imports. Okay, and then it has the opposite effect. It will decrease when the price of exports become less expensive relative to the prices of imports. Okay, all these other factors may be influenced, like the balance of trade, for example. That's going to depend on the elasticity for exports and imports. The current account balance, the same thing. That consists of different components. So we also have the primary income and the secondary income accounts, and we have our balance of trade in goods and our balance of trade in services. And then the exchange rate, same thing. We may have a consequential effect on the exchange rate, but we can't say for certain that that will definitely improve. Terms of trade definitely will, because it is measured through these changes in prices of exports and changes in prices of imports. Again, another very simple question for 24. Which item is not included in the current account on the balance of payments? That is the balancing item. The exports of services are balance of trade in services, import of goods are balance of trade in goods, and the interest received from overseas investments, that is also accounted for. Remember, we have our primary income and our secondary income accounts, which take account of things like the compensation of employees, net property income from abroad is also included in that primary income. And then our secondary income account consists of gifts that are made or international aid flows and current transfers. 23. The diagram shows a shift in an economy's aggregate demand curve from AD1 to AD2. What would not be a cause in the shift? So what we've had here is we've had obviously an expansionary policy that's been used, right? Now we've already gone through the expansionary monetary policies at the start of the video. So just to list out the expansionary fiscal policies, they would be lowering taxes and increasing government expenditure, okay, government spending. So a decrease in income tax, that would be a shift, because that would be expansionary fiscal policy. An increase in the money wage rates, that also would cause a shift. So if you think about it very simply, right? What happens if the wage rates of people go up? They get more money in their pockets, which means that the total demand in the economy will increase as well, right? And if we have an increase in the money supply, that will also cause a shift, because that will be an expansionary monetary policy. Okay, so the most sensible option here is a decrease in the price of goods, which is not going to cause a shift. It's going to cause either an extension or a contraction in AD or in our regular demand curve. Okay, remember, the things that cause the extension or the contraction is the change in the price of the good or the service itself shifts are caused by all of those other factors that we learned. So in this case for AD, they would be either the expansionary fiscal or expansionary monetary policies, or something which is likely to influence our components of AD, like an increase in the money wage rates is likely to increase consumer expenditure, which is one of our components of AD. Okay, question 22. From the initial position of equilibrium shown, if there is an increase in government expenditure on goods and services, and simultaneously an increase in the cost of production, what best describes the likely impact on the economy? Okay, so if there is an increase in government expenditure, what is that going to do? We've just described that that is a expansionary fiscal policy, so that is going to shift our AD curve to the right. Okay. And if we have an increase in the cost of production of goods and services, that is going to shift our AS curve to the left. Okay, so if we draw this, if we have a shift in AD to the right and AS to the left, now, in this case, what's happened? The equilibrium level of national income is going to be the level of real output, right? Now, you can see that what I've drawn here is I've had a bigger shift in AS than AD. We can see that from my wonky lines that I'm drawing on the curve, right? But can we say for certain that the equilibrium level will decrease? No, we can't, because if the shift in AD is bigger, for example, the shift in AD to the right is bigger than the shift to the left in AS, we might actually have a case where our output will go up. If those shifts are the same, then the output will stay the same. And if the shift is bigger in AS, then the output will decrease. So therefore, we don't know the extent of these shifts in AD and AS. So the change that's going to happen in equilibrium level of national income is uncertain. Okay, we said that it's going to rise if AD is going to be bigger than the shift in AS. There'll be no change if the shift in both of them is at the same level. And then there'll be a fall if the shift in AS, just like we've drawn here, is going to be greater than the shift in AD. Okay, but we can't say for certain because we don't know the extent of these changes. But what we can say is that in every circumstance, irregardless of the level of the shift in AD and AS, we can see that our price level is always going to rise. Okay, so therefore D is our correct answer and our only suitable option. Okay, question 21. The terms of trade index for Mauritius fell from 111.2 to 106.1 in the second quarter. So first thing is, remember what the terms of trade index measures. It measures the index of export prices divided by the index of import prices. Okay, so it's measuring, like we said at the start of the video, it's basically measuring the change in the prices of exports relative to the changes in the prices of imports. Now, if the terms of trade is going down, that means that the the export prices are becoming cheaper comparatively to the import prices. What combination could have produced this outcome? Okay, so the correct answer here, just to show you, will actually be B. Okay, and why is that? So if we have an increase in our export prices could go up and our import prices could go up too. But what we might have is we might have a more significant increase in the level of the import prices, right? Which will actually reduce our terms of trade. Okay, So the level or the extent of these changes in the import prices may actually rise, but it may be a greater rise in imports than it will be for exports, which would mean that our terms of trade would still decrease. Whereas if our export prices went up and our import prices fell, the only possible scenario there is that this 111 would increase to a higher number, because then our exports would definitely become more expensive in terms of our imports. Same thing here, if our export prices go up and our import prices remain unchanged, we would have to have a number that is bigger than 111, because our export prices would 100% for certain be going up by more than the change in import prices. And the same for here, if we had our export prices unchanged but our import prices fell, could that result in a combination of these changes? Well, yes, possibly. But B, where our import prices will rise, but they will rise comparatively stronger than our export prices, will be the most suitable option. Okay. Question 20. If you want to go through 21 of those terms of trade questions, just contact me. Okay, I've got a collection of videos on those questions. We can go through them. So government removes its quota on imported laptops. Assuming a normal demand curve, let me just move this up here. Assuming normal demand curve and upward sloping supply curve for laptops, what are the likely effects on domestic laptop manufacturers? Okay, so if they remove their quota on imported laptops, that means it's going to be easier for us to import the laptops, right? So essentially what is going to happen is that now that it becomes easier for us to import the laptops, in the domestic market, what's going to happen is that we're going to have a decrease in the demand for domestic laptops, right? Because now we can import them and there's no restrictions on the imports because the quota has been removed. So therefore what's going to happen, we can see it by just drawing a regular demand and supply curve. The change that's going to take place is that the price we're going to be receiving for the domestic laptops will reduce due to the decreased level of demand, and the quantity that is being traded will also reduce due to the shift in demand to the left. So the change in price is going to go down, and the change in income received, because we've got this lower quantity traded, the income that we're going to receive for those domestic laptop producers is going to go down. Question 19. The diagram shows annual consumer price index for Japan over the year 1990 to 2010. Which period did they experience inflation at approximately 2% and deflation at approximately 2.5? Okay, so 1992 to 1994, we can say that they had approximately inflation during this period at 2%, but there's nothing below the line here which indicates that we haven't had deflation, right? So remember that deflation is a negative figure, so it's not going to be that. 1996 to 1998, so we've had deflation, and it's nowhere near the 2.5% that they've told us. We're only around less than 1% here. We do have around 2% inflation, but because we don't have the deflation again here, between 1996 and 1998, that can't be correct. 2006 and 2008 is the exact same. We don't have the level of deflation that we're looking for, and we don't actually have the level of inflation that we're looking for too, because we're well below 2% here. But from 2008 to 2010, we can see that we have the inflation here at about 2%, and then we're experiencing deflation in 2010 by about 2.5%. So that's going to be our correct answer. Very straightforward, very simple. All we have to do is read the graph. Okay, a bus fare in a rural area is $5 per journey. Government decides to improve local transport by giving bus firms a subsidy of $2 per journey. Diagram shows possible changes. Okay, now remember that with a subsidy we're going to have a shift in the supply curve to the right. Okay, now the level of the subsidy, which is $2 per journey, that amount that is actually passed on to the consumer in the form of lower prices depends on the elasticity. So this was our previous equilibrium level, and we can see that the only option we have for shifting the supply to the right is to land at this new equilibrium level, which means that even though the extent of the subsidy is $2 per journey, the new equilibrium price in the market that consumers are going to be paying is $4 per journey, and the quantity is going to be 1,050 because that is our new equilibrium level. So C is going to be our correct answer here. Okay, very straightforward. This area from 4 to 3 will essentially be the producer's gain, right, from the subsidy. So this is like the extra dollar that the producer is gaining from the subsidy that they're keeping for themselves and they don't have to pass on to the consumer. Three types of taxes are listed. Which combination describes the effects of these taxes? Okay, so we've got a sales tax on fuel, we've got a specific tax, and we have an income tax where individual earnings increase as taxable income increases. Okay, so first thing to know is what's the difference between progressive and regressive. So progressive, the higher you earn, so the more money you earn, the higher the percentage of tax that you pay. Regressive taxation, the higher you earn, the smaller the percentage of tax you pay. Okay, so lower earners are the ones who will have the negative consequences through regressive taxes. Higher income earners are the ones who have the negative consequences of progressive tax. So first of all, we start off with the income tax. Income tax is going to be progressive, right? Because as people earn more money, they have to pay a higher percentage of tax. Now, both the VAT and the specific tax, they're both forms of indirect taxes, okay? And indirect taxes, they tend to be regressive in nature because they're taxes on products or services. The way to think about it is, think about somebody who's on a fixed income, right? So somebody who's on, let's say, 1,000 RMB a month, they might be classified as a low income earner. They're going to be paying a higher percentage of their income on the sales tax on fuel and on the specific tax on cigarettes because they have less money, right? The total amount that they're paying will be the same as the high income earner, but the high income earner who's getting 10,000 RMB a month, they're going to be paying a smaller percentage of their income through these taxes. So hence the reason why indirect taxes tend to be regressive in nature, definitely not progressive. National Library Board of Singapore is a public sector organisation that finances and manages the state libraries. What is the most likely reason for this? Okay, so first of all, we start at the bottom. The opportunity cost to the public sector of providing libraries is zero. We know that that's not true. There's always going to be an opportunity cost when the government is essentially because it's a public sector organisation, they're the ones that are financing it. That's always going to cause an opportunity cost because they have to take away from some area in order to move it into another area. Okay. Now, the cost of providing library services would be greater in the primary sector. That may be a possible reason, but it's unlikely to be the reason why the government are providing it, right? Libraries are public goods will definitely not be a reason. Okay, libraries are not public goods, they're private goods, because they will definitely not be non-excludable and non-rivalrous. They're likely to exhibit either the characteristic of excludability or either the characteristics of rivalrous, which will make them a private good. Most likely reason is that they're merit goods because they generate external benefits through the education or the knowledge that can be gained from them. So therefore, because they will be under-consumed if managed by the private sector, they can still make money out of them, remember, then the government is likely to take them over and manage and finance them to try and essentially get more people to use them so that society can start to benefit from the external benefits they're generating. Okay, question 15. What are the effects of imposing a maximum price below the equilibrium price? So simple, draw a maximum price and it will show you the effect. So this is going to be our equilibrium price in the market. And then we're going to have our max price imposed below the equilibrium. So what's it going to do? We can see it's going to result in an extension in demand, it's going to create the excess demand, and it's going to result in a contraction in supply. So it's going to limit the supply and extend the level of demand. So therefore what we can see is that demand will go up and the supply will fall. Okay, straightforward. Just have to know how to draw one. Question 14. To improve its financial position, a government decided to reduce expenditure on investment in the public sector. There was not a fall in economic growth. What is the most likely effect of the government's actions? Some of these actions may have other effects, or they may actually happen, but they might not be the most likely. So start at the bottom. Public sector productivity decreased. No. Okay. Now, can that happen? Of course it can, because they're reducing the expenditure on investment. But they've given us a caveat in the question, because they've told us that there's no fall in economic growth. Therefore, if there's no fall in economic growth, we can assume that the productivity has remained the same, right? Because we must have the same level of output of goods and services that are being provided. Now, that's the exact same for C, okay? For C, consumer expenditure has decreased. Consumer expenditure decreasing would result in aggregate demand going to the left, right? But again, we've been told that there's no fall in economic growth, so we can assume that the total demand in the economy is the same, right? And therefore, will consumer expenditure decrease with the reduction in investment? It may, but not with the caveat in the question, no fall in economic growth. And finally, between the two, an original budget deficit was reduced or an original budget surplus was reduced. Okay, so reducing the investment in the public sector, what is that going to do? That is going to reduce government expenditure, right? So what can that do? That can either reduce a surplus or it can reduce a deficit. But again, in the question, the caveat that's given to us is that they're trying to improve their financial position. So the clue is in the question that it must be referring to an original budget deficit, as that must be what they're trying to improve. Okay, so the most likely one, with the caveats that are given to us in the question here, would be an original budget deficit was trying to be reduced. Question 13, good question this one. Diagram shows the effect of a change in the market for good X and good Y. What is the most likely relationship between the two goods? So what can we see happening? We can see that for good X, the supply of good X has increased, right? Which has resulted in the price coming down for that good. Okay. Now, what we need to think about is when the price of good X comes down, we can see that that has an effect of shifting the demand curve for good Y to the right. Okay. So what do we know about that? We know that with complements, for example, that the price of the complement goes down, the demand for our product goes up, right? Whereas for substitutes, we know that if the price of the substitute goes down, the demand for our products, as people will switch to the substitutes instead, will also go down, right? So if it was a substitute, for example, we would expect the demand curve to shift to the left. So it's not going to be substitutes. It's nothing to do with demerit goods. We can see that it is a complement, and joint supply is where the goods are a byproduct of the production. So they may be used in two different purposes. Oh God, sorry for that. Okay, so if it was joint supply, we would expect to see a different effect. Okay, the clue is given to us in the question by the fact that the price goes down, and we know that that will increase the demand for a complement. Okay, what causes the demand curve for an inferior good to shift to the right? So one thing to remember about this is remember that with inferior goods, there is an inverse relationship with income through YED. So basically that means that when income goes up, the demand goes down, and when income goes down, the demand goes up for those inferior goods. Okay, so therefore straightforward, what would cause the demand curve to shift to the right? So we're having an increase in demand. So the demand is going up, which tells us that the income of consumers must be coming down. Okay, decrease in income tax would actually result in their income going up, which would move the demand curve to the left. Okay, and we know that inferior goods, it's talking about YED, income elasticity and demand, so we're always looking for income. Other keywords are recessions or economic booms and how they will affect the demand too. Question 11. A rise in the price of a good is accompanied by an increase in the quantity demanded. Okay, so price of the good is going up and we're having an increase in the demand for that good. Okay, so what has happened? A, consumers spend a high proportion of disposable income on the good, so that would not explain it, would it? Because if they spend a high proportion of disposable income on the good, the price of the product going up, that would result in the demand coming down because they're going to be much more price sensitive to that product due to spending more of their income on it. The price of a complementary good has also increased, so if the price of a complementary good goes up, we would expect that the demand for our product would decrease, right? So that's not going to explain why we've had an increase in the quantity demanded. Price of a good is taken to be an indication of the level of quality, okay? So this is a reason why it may. If the price of the good is taken to be an indication of the level of quality, then if the price of the good increases, we may have an increase in the demand, as people will deem the higher price to be indicative of a higher level of quality for that good. And therefore substitute goods are all very much more expensive. That may possibly explain it, but it's not going to explain it in terms of why we would have this increase in the quantity demanded. Because consumers, should the substitutes be very much more expensive, they'll still look for ways to switch to other products if the price of ours goes up. So the one that is most likely to explain it is the indication in the level of quality. Okay, question 10. A firm estimates that its PES is 1.5. What does this indicate? Okay, so firm has no excess capacity. That definitely doesn't indicate that. If the firm has no excess capacity, we would expect their PES value to be very inelastic, right? Now what we're looking for here is the factors that determine the PES, right? And that's things like the availability of stock, their spare capacity in the market, the time period that it takes to produce the product, etc. So firm indicates or operates in a competitive market. No. So remember that with PES, it's less reliant on the competitive markets than PED is, for example. So like a highly elastic PED value may indicate they're operating in a competitive market because it may indicate that they have a lot of substitutes. But for PES, it's more internally focused. So they're focusing on their ability to be able to increase the supply should the price change in the market. So it's internally focused on their responsiveness to the changes in price. And does it indicate the firm raises their price by 10% and total revenue increases? No. Remember that PED is an indicator of total revenue changes, not PES. PES is just an indication of what we said, which is how responsive they can be to the changes in prices in a market. How quickly can they release their supply? But if they have available levels of stock, that would indicate that they have an elastic PES, because they can release their stocks quickly onto the market. So should the price of the product change, they will be able to release their supply quicker. So that is the one there that makes the most sense. Question 9. When will the price mechanism be least likely to reallocate resources to meet a change in consumer preferences? So when the government removes all price controls, that will make it likely, right? Because that will allow the price mechanism or the market mechanism, whatever you want to call it, to operate freely, right? So it will do its job essentially. It will reallocate resources to meet changes in consumer preferences or changes in demand. When the supply of factors of production is limited, we know that the supply of the factors of production is limited, but that doesn't make it any less likely that they're going to reallocate resources, because the supply of factors of production is limited in a lot of industries and in most things, in fact. So therefore, what's going to happen is that price mechanism will still reallocate resources. And when there's a redistribution of income, they will be very likely to reallocate resources as well, due to the fact that redistribution of income will just change the consumer preferences, and therefore the price mechanism will reallocate resources and make a signal that is going to the producers of different goods and services that either they need to switch their production, for example, or that they need to change the products they're offering to a market or change their prices. But if their new preferences are for public goods, then it won't reallocate resources. Why? Because private sector, remember, will not provide public goods. Due to no profit incentive. So there's going to be no profit incentive for the private sector to make those public goods, hence the reason why the price mechanism won't be able to work when it comes to reallocating resources for it. Okay, now 8 I'm not going to spend too long on. Very simple. Go to your slides, look up your definition of cross elasticity of demand. It is the percentage change in the demand for product A, which in this case is X, divided by the percentage change in the price of product Y. No more time to spend on that. Just learn the definition. Okay, nothing else you can do. Very similar for 7. Demand curves are drawn ceteris paribus. What other things are not required to remain the same when an individual's demand curve for ice cream is constructed? So remember, with ceteris paribus, what we normally draw it is we draw it assuming that the price can change, but all of the other factors that will affect demand or will affect supply, like income, like taste and preferences, those factors that will cause shifts, for example, that they will not change. So the thing that we are allowing to change when we draw a demand curve ceteris paribus is the price of ice cream, right? But when we draw our demand curve here, we're allowing the price to change when we draw it ceteris paribus, but we're not taking into account that consumer incomes may result in a shift in demand, for example. Okay. Six, the diagram shows the demand and supply curves for cars in India. The initial equilibrium is at X. What will the new equilibrium be if there is a subsidy given to Indian car manufacturers? So remember, with a subsidy, what does that do? That increases the supply, so supply will shift to the right, and there is an increase in the price of train and bus journeys in India. So we're looking at the market for cars, right? And therefore, if the price of a substitute goes up, there will be less people using the train and the bus journeys in India, which means that the demand for driving cars is going to increase. Okay, so just follow it along. We start at X, we have an initial shift in the supply, which means we move to here, and then we can see that we have a shift in the demand through the increase in the price of the substitutes, which leaves us at B. Okay, question 5. So what explains why the supply curve for chicken slopes upwards? So the first one, an increase in the demand for chicken will bring about a rise in supply. Remember, demand has nothing to do with this because we're only talking about why does this explain why the supply curve is shaped this way, right? So why is the supply curve shaped curvically like this? Farmers' productivity rises as the price rises. No. So first of all, that's not necessarily true, right? And it doesn't explain why what's happening here is that we're having significant increases in price as our quantity of the product is going up, right? If we had productivity rising as the price was rising, what we would have is that we would have significant changes in the quantity. And also, remember that as the productivity rises, that may allow us to sell the product at slightly cheaper prices. So we wouldn't expect to see such a steep grade or steep curve here for the supply curve. Because we can see that when we get to this point here with our quantity, we're having really significant changes in price here. So that must indicate something to us about the cost of this product. Increased production leads to a reduction in cost. Okay, no. So again, what we can see is that when we're at this point here, for example, when we're releasing a decent quantity onto the market, we can see that the shape is very inelastic for the supply here, right? So that must tell us that the costs, as the quantity is increasing, the costs must be high, right? We're probably referring to the variable costs that we have as our production is going up, right? But we know that the costs must be high because the price at which we're selling the product is very high when we get to the higher levels of quantity. So therefore the explanation is the cost of additional chicken production rises as the output increases, which is what we can see, right? So based on the shape of it here, we can see that as the quantity is going up, the cost or the price of the production has to be increasing because the selling price is increasing significantly. Why would the selling price increase significantly? It would only increase significantly if we were having much higher costs of production in making the product, because we now need to sell it for a much higher price to make a decent level of profit. Question 4. PPC shows the abilities of 4 economies to produce wheat and rice. Which PPC has the lowest opportunity cost for producing wheat? Okay, so all we have to do is look at the PPCs. We can see that for D, producing 6 units of wheat or 120 units of rice, so therefore for D to produce 1 wheat, our opportunity cost is 20 rice. For C, it's 6 divided by 80, so the opportunity cost of producing 1 wheat would be whatever, I'm not going to calculate it precisely, let's say 12.5 rice. Okay, 80 divided by 6 and whatever that gives you. For B, 4 wheat gives us 40 rice, so the opportunity cost of 1 wheat is going to be 10 rice. And for A, we can see that the opportunity cost of 1 wheat in here is going to be 40 rice. Okay, so therefore which one has the lowest opportunity cost is the one that where we're giving up the least amount of rice, and we can see that that would be B. Question 3, forget it. No longer on the syllabus. Money was taken out of AS Economics with the syllabus changes. So 2, what is a normative economic action based on? A normative economic action is based on opinion. Okay, there's 2 types of statements. They could be normative or positive. Remember, our keywords is that normative is an opinion based, or sometimes we say that it is subjective. Okay, and it's not testable. Whereas what we refer to as positive statements are factual, they can be tested. Okay. And last question. PPC shows combinations of outputs an economy can produce using all available resources. Which points in the diagram are all available resources used? Okay, so just to explain the points, if we're at point Y, remember that any point which is inside the curve means that we're not using all available resources. We are inefficient in our use of those resources. So that means that essentially we are not using all of the labor or all of the capital, for example, that we can in the economy, so we're producing inefficiently. Any point that is outside the curve represents a position of scarcity, which is where we don't have enough resources available in our economy to actually produce at that level of output. We would need to increase the quantity and quality of resources through shifting the PPC in order to actually reach that level of output. Okay? Whereas any point that is on the PPC, which is W and X, these two, they represent what we refer to as an efficient allocation of resources. So any point on the PPC, it doesn't matter where it is, represents that we are using all of the resources we have available to us in the economy in an efficient manner. Okay, so therefore W and X for that one. Okay, thanks for listening.